So imagine this, you die, lose an arm, watch your country burn, and then wake up as a weak, bullied prince in the enemy kingdom. Yeah, that is not a bad dream. That is this story. Our Michi gets sent 10 years back in time, reborn into a body that is supposed to die in a few months, surrounded by drunk princes, crazy queens, fake smiles, and at least 3 people already planning his assassination. Oh, and the best part, he is hiding the fact that he is a top-tier mage. Sit back, because this is not a hero story, this is a revenge speedrun with a reset button, so do not forget to subscribe. It felt like living hell. If anyone ever doubted it existed, now it was right there, visible with their own eyes. He was standing right in front of them. The injured man turned toward the prince named Burn. After that moment, Kairi collapsed onto his shoulder. Sadly, this was the only way he could repay his prince for everything Burn had done for Kiri. Prince Burn did not want to hear such words from his friend and subordinate. Even while shouting, Kairi asked him to grip his sword tighter. And he made him remember one more thing. Burn must never give up. He refused to accept that Kairi was already dead. Still, the prince drew his sword and let out a scream. It was a cry filled with despair and pain over losing his friend. Long ago, a country known as Caius, founded by dragons and humans, demanded a treasure from his homeland. That treasure was called the Time Axis. Secretia refused. Someone launched a magical attack at the prince. Even though he reacted in time, the exhaustion from battle had already caught up to him. Burn lost an arm, because Secretia would not hand over the treasure. It marked the beginning of war and the destruction of his country. The protagonist was Burn of Secretia. On the battlefield, he was already the last person the enemy should have allowed to live. Burn himself understood that everything was over and death was waiting for him. But at that moment, Kari's words telling him not to give up echoed in his mind. That was why Burn would never surrender. These people would not stop him so easily, because he was the trusted sword of Secretia. A group wearing white robes approached him, their faces completely hidden. They were the magical alliance of Cuse called the Valk, and the man who caused this war. The Mad King of Kiss Planche. They were responsible for turning his homeland into flames. Arson, the High Mage of Valken, stepped forward. Burn felt no joy at meeting him. Arson asked the warrior his name. The protagonist replied that he had erased his name from memory. He was nothing more than a sword serving his king saying that. He rushed straight at Arson. Even with his face concealed, a smile was visible. Arson said he would remember the Prince of Secretia. A man with brown hair and blue eyes was ringing a bell, with a servant standing beside him. The man insisted that the prince hurry. Prince Planche had already left. Burn never thought he would hear that name again. He clearly remembered Planche cutting off his arm. A boy asked His Highness not to say such frightening things. Even the servants began whispering. How could a prince chop off his own arm? It had to be a dream, a nightmare. The man started worrying about His Highness. Burn still did not understand what was happening. The name of a man he deeply hated. His arm was whole, a servant he had never seen before, and memories that never belonged to him. Everything flooded his mind at once. The main character asked to be told who he was. The man with brown hair called out a name, Kali Rain, Karis. He was now the 3rd prince of Cuse, and everything felt like the worst nightmare possible. He clearly remembered dying on the battlefield. His name should have been Burn, Secretia. So how did this even happen? The main character asked what day it was. The boy answered that it was the 28th of April. After that, the prince asked what year it was. The reply was the 522nd year. The man could not understand what had happened to the prince at all. He truly could not believe it. The cause of that war was the axis of time. The time axis was a strange treasure that could only turn time back once. Suddenly and without warning, it appeared inside the palace of Secretia. News of this spread across the entire world. Lords of the continent and the powers of Cuse were consumed by desire to obtain it. Even though Cuse was a great power, the axis of time belonged to Secretia. There was no reason to hand it over to anyone. Cuse was refused as if they had been waiting for it. The king did not want to send his brother. Everyone who had gone to war was already dead. They could not afford to lose anyone else. That same day, James witnessed Burn's death. He must have wished to return to the time before all those terrible events. That thought felt correct. Perhaps James used the time axis and turned back time. For him, this was the final chance. Maybe now he could save his homeland Secretia from destruction. He knew the prince struggled with morning meetings, but there was no time left to delay. The prince agreed and apologized for keeping him waiting. He said he would be ready in just a minute. This was a chance he would never let slip away. The protagonist would live as a prince of Cuse and eventually die as one. They entered the dining room. The boy apologized to the prince, saying he thought he should have prepared a little faster. He did not expect Prince Randall to already be there. Randall ruled Chios and was also the crown prince. All princes of Chios were half-brothers. The blood of the sacred state of Tensel flowed through Crown Prince Randall. By the king's order, the three princes met every morning. Colin apologized for being late, but Randall did not respond. Colin seemed invisible to everyone. Being ignored so openly by another person felt disgusting. But was the crown prince really alone? Suddenly, Prince Planche arrived. He took a seat at the table. The protagonist did not immediately realize which member of the royal family would appear like that. Could this be the Mad King Planche? He knew the name, but judging by his appearance, the nickname Mad must have meant something entirely different. The protagonist remembered that Planche and Randall did not get along well. With the influence of Planche's mother and Queen Chios, no one in the palace could oppose them. Living in that environment must have been unbearable. It was completely uncultured. There was not even a trace of decency in him. In that sense, Callan was similar to his mother. The protagonist reminded himself to endure it. He would not waste the chance James had given him. Anger was boiling inside him. At that very moment, he wanted only one thing: to twist the neck of that bastard Planche. Planche shattered his teacup. How dare Colin even look at him like that in front of everyone? Randall stepped in and told them to stop immediately. Planche looked at his brother, then turned his gaze toward Colin. In the end, Planche had no choice but to leave. After such insolence, all his appetite was gone. Randall stood up as well. The crown prince warned the protagonist to watch his behavior from now on. The king's birthday was already chaotic. So this was Colin's fault too, not that bastard Planche. The servant asked the prince if he was all right and whether anything hurt. For some reason, the prince had been unwell all day. He also wiped the place where the tea had spilled. Since the prince was treated like a blank slate here, having a servant nearby felt reassuring, and this servant genuinely took care of him. Colin thanked him. In the past, Prince Callion would have just sat there with tears in his eyes. But now, he was smiling. The first queen of Chios was Sisphanian, an ancient dragon. Her hair was pitch black and her eyes burned like flames. Call looked very much like her, but the power he possessed was pitiful. He was always forced to hide his red eyes because Planche hated them, and the reason was only a single phrase. Planche saying that Callion's eyes were disgusting. It made the boy uncomfortable, like he was looking into memories that did not belong to him. But it turned out this man did not always hide his out of fear of someone like Planche. What an idiot. The servant asked if there was anything he could do for the prince, but Callion replied that he did not need anything right now. Still, the servant noticed the prince was acting strange today. Maybe he had stayed up late reading Shualic novels again, but that was not the real issue. The third prince, born to the king and his ignorant mistress, was afraid of many things and had no one to support him. He was weak. Someone who could not even protect himself. This was Callion's situation, and something important would happen on the eve of his coming-of-age ceremony. Colin asked how old he was now. The servant answered that he would turn 15 in 4 months. During the ceremony, Call was assassinated for political reasons. He was said to have tried to poison the queen and failed. After that, the prince supposedly hanged himself out of fear of punishment. That was what secular society claimed. Though no one truly believed it, before long, someone would kill Call. His death was only a month or two away. He could not afford to sit around and do nothing. The protagonist asked for a pair of scissors. Even though the servant did not understand why the prince wanted them, he handed them over. The servant asked why His Highness needed scissors. The protagonist answered that it was time for a change. If you already know what will happen in the future, then changing even the smallest detail can cause everything to collapse. The rumors could not understand what the protagonist was doing. After all, Prince Planche would definitely hate this. Even so, Call did not care. Everything was fine now. So the Planche was convinced that this man had completely lost his mind. But if he knew this reaction would happen, then why did he do it? Could this be what His Highness meant when he said he knew what he was doing? Planche turned toward the kid known as Bloody-Eyed, but Colin said that he had a name, and even stated it. Planche picked up a knife and asked if that meant he should call him by his first name. Right after that, he threw it at the servant standing behind Call. Unexpectedly, Colin managed to catch the knife, but the servant was terrified. He was especially worried about His Highness's injured arm. Planche started insisting that the knife had simply slipped from his hand. Poor Callie was hurt. The protagonist walked over to the prince, placed the knife on the table, and said everything was fine. He even called him brother. That only irritated Planche even more. Callion kept repeating that nothing was wrong. After that, they returned to the prince's room and brought Togo's instruments to treat the wound. The servant thought they should call a doctor, but Colin refused, saying it was only a scratch. Now something else troubled him. Why hadn't the servant dodged? Planche had been aiming for him. What would have happened if Colin had not intercepted that attack? They needed to be able to defend against situations like this. Ian did not know how the prince might react, so he feared that Blanche would turn his anger toward the protagonist. Merritt was covered in blood and his heart felt like it would burst from his chest. Colin said he would clean himself and ordered no one to enter the room. The servant wanted to help, but Colin stopped him and warned him not to call a doctor. The man could not understand why he was forbidden from doing even that. Earlier, Colin had tried to use his aura to repel Blanche's attack. But suddenly, a sharp pain struck his heart. Now he needed to recreate the moment and confirm Colin's physical condition. That was when he sensed 3 magical seals around his heart. Only then did he realize the truth. The real Colin had been a magician all along. A few days later, the servant was panicking. Several days had passed, and the prince's wound still looked the same. Colin once again said it was nothing. Also present in the room was Seth's tailor, the court tour. The moment Callian approached him, the man dropped his measuring tape. Colin asked what was wrong. The man apologized, saying he had unconsciously remembered Lady Freya. But Ian stopped him. He was already tired of this reaction ever since he cut his hair. Col had suffered for a long time because of his resemblance to his mother, whom he had never even seen. It had been so unbearable that he removed all mirrors from his chambers. But now it was fine. He knew he looked like Freya. He told the court tour to continue. The man began taking his measurements. The prince needed to eat more. They worried about how small he was, but Colin insisted he was a good eater. Even so, everyone else remained concerned. The royal family of Chias were descendants of dragons. More precisely, they inherited the blood of 2 of the 8 heroes who sealed the evil god. Hatra and Sisfanian passed down healing powers and magical ability through the royal line. This was known as the Sisfanian blessing. That meant Callian's wound should have healed long ago. Yet it had not. Every time he used mana, pain struck his heart. That was extremely dangerous. If this continued, he would lose the ability to use aura and magic and would eventually die at the hands of an assassin. The court tour brought the prepared clothes. The boy wondered if there was anyone here who understood mana. The clothes were perfect for attending the king's birthday celebration. Since it was His Majesty's birthday, someone important would be present as well, the great wizard Ellen Manasil. Callian must meet this wizard. Ellen Manasil is one of only 3 or 4 mages who have reached the 7th circle and is an idol to all mages. In the past, he was invited to the king's birthday celebration and had come to Chios. However, the story of how he was not even allowed through the gate because of a certain incident spread all the way to the neighboring state of Secret Sissia. Even then, Ellen Manasil never had the chance to attend the celebration. Decades later, he became a grand wizard of the 8th circle, the only one on the continent to prove such power. There is no mana expert greater than him. He should be able to help solve the problems with this body. Although Colin does not know what incident occurred back then, Chios has never treated mages particularly well. Because of that, it is uncertain whether Ellen Manasil would agree to his proposal. There is a reason why so many knights roam the kingdom of Chios, and that reason lies in the influence of Blanche's mother's family, the Brizzen family. Colin needs the power of Magi, even if it is only to restrain the Brizzen family. And if he can gain Ellen as an ally, he may even be able to stop the war plan that Blanche intends to start. But before that, there was something else he had to deal with. Namely the fact that 3 people were busy fussing over his pajamas. The girl said the ribbons were too small, and that she preferred larger ones like the example she showed. The apparatchik insisted more lace should be added. Colin firmly said, no ribbons and no frills. How was he even supposed to look wearing lace, and what were those bells anyway? Who were they trying to turn him into? As usual, he was drinking tea in his room. Colin was slowly getting used to this kind of life. His arm was almost healed, and Blanche had been openly ignoring him since that incident, which was actually a good thing. Jan reported that there would be a riding lesson with the prince in the morning, and a dinner with the Queen and Viscount Brizzen in the afternoon. Jan believed it was because of the king's upcoming birthday. He would have to face these people eventually, so there was nothing to avoid. Ian asked His Highness if today was also a day for stamina training. The protagonist said it would just be a light jog in front of the palace lake, so there was no need to worry. What could even happen there? But in reality, it felt like he was about to die. Merlin Fiant, Callian's maid and the second daughter of the outer defense squad leader, asked if the prince was doing well. On the first day, he ran 4.5 laps, and on the third day, 4 laps. Today he only ran 3. His stamina was clearly dropping, and that was a problem. Marilyn suggested calling a doctor if he was having a hard time, but Colin replied that he was fine. If a healer was called, the circles of mana would be discovered immediately. Even Ian did not know that Colin was a mage, and reckless behavior could cost him his life. Colin wondered how a healer could even help with stamina loss. Still, she thought it might be better to call one, but he insisted he was fine and would recover soon. Suddenly, they heard a shout telling them not to look away. The knights had already begun their training. They were told not to take their eyes off the blade. If this man were already on the battlefield, he would be dead by now. They were urged to fight without doubt and go all the way. Even so, this kind of training brought back memories of the past. Marilyn said this was the training ground of the famed Night Corps. Colin already knew that. He was only looking out of interest. Still, it surprised her since he had never even held a sword before. Apparently, His Highness did not know much about this Night Corps. Of course, he knew it was the Royal Night Corps. More precisely, it was the Night Corps of the Brizen family, meant to keep the king's power in check. Fable, the commander of the Ryer Corps, approached them and demanded to know who they were. If they had no business here, they should leave. Their presence was distracting his knights from training. Marilyn demanded respect, stating that the third Prince Colin was standing before him. But Fable did not look pleased at all to hear that it was Prince Colin. He almost mistook the prince for a mole spying from the shadows. That bastard was starting to get on his nerves. And how was he even supposed to realize that? Marilyn could not understand how he dared to speak such impertinent words in front of His Highness. The prince, Fable had said that he almost mistook him. Why such a sharp reaction, especially when the prince himself had not reacted at all? But suddenly, he felt something he never expected. Even he did not understand what it was. He had never been like this before. Now Fable could not understand what the third prince was doing. The commander had been summoned by the queen, yet the prince was blocking his way. In the past, Callian would have simply apologized and said he would leave immediately. He was always careful and obedient. So what was this newfound spirit the prince was showing now? Call turned to Commander Fable, signaling that he wanted to ask a question. The protagonist asked him about his duty. Other knights gathered around the commander, asking what was going on. They quickly recognized the third prince, but they could not understand why he was here. After all, he was only the third prince, someone even the knights looked down on. The commander replied that they were in the middle of training and could not answer the prince. He told him to mind his own business and leave. Marilyn wanted to say something, but the prince stood his ground. He had already asked the question, and now demanded an answer. The commander must state his duty. Fable answered that his duty was to strengthen the power of the royal family and protect both the royal family and the kingdom. He knew his responsibilities. He had to protect them. But this time, the commander had failed completely. He did not understand what the prince meant. First was strengthening the royal family, but from Colin's perspective, this training was nothing but chaos. As soon as he said that, he appeared behind the commander. Fable instantly realized that if he failed to block the attack, he would die. He drew his sword and blocked the protagonist's stick. The power carried by a single branch was overwhelming. Just as Colin expected, he then knocked the sword out of the commander's hands. Kaylee could not believe that Fable could not even predict the movement of someone who had never held a sword. The boy was disappointed. Now it was time to talk about the second point. The commander clearly felt the determination and killing intent. A protector of the royal family addressing a member of the royal family with disrespect. On top of that, raising a sword against the prince and injuring him. Call wondered if this should be considered betrayal. Now the commander began to doubt whether this truly was the third prince he knew. He dropped to his knees and begged Callian for forgiveness. His mind was in turmoil. Fable claimed that he had never harbored thoughts of treason and pleaded for mercy. But Fable would never forget how that useless third prince had humiliated him. Meanwhile, Ian wondered why the prince who went to train had returned with a horse. Colin told him that he had picked it up along the way and that its name was Raven. Ian asked where he found it and how he even got the horse. Once everyone had calmed down, Colin asked what was wrong with it. They told him that Prince Planche had failed to tame the horse. As one could see, it was extremely fierce. And Colin had a new idea. Ian asked whether it was really fine to bring Prince Planche's horse here. Col replied that anyone could take it. Some lose things, others find them. He also asked Marilyn to keep what happened at the training ground a secret. Ian realized what would happen if the prince found out. Colin insisted that everything would be fine. Just as he was about to continue, pain struck his heart. The servants immediately grew worried. It happened exactly as he expected. Colin had pushed that body too far. Ian asked if he had overdone the training earlier, but Callian said he had not. He simply enjoyed himself after training by playing with something. Even though Ian was curious about what the prince had been playing with, Colin did not explain. They would be late for dinner. He asked Jan to prepare everything he needed. Still, he wondered what he should do with the horse. Callian hesitated when Jan asked if the horse would bite. So that was what he meant. And it was quite interesting. This unknown man had once heard that even if worms start wriggling, stepping on them would still crush everything together. Even if someone like this guy started kicking around, it would not change the outcome at all. Simply pushing forward and killing him would not be interesting. For now, they would just observe. Still, it was hard to get used to this atmosphere, even after experiencing it every day. But something felt different. Why was Planche so quiet today? Could it be that the Queen and Viscount Bryson were delayed because of Colin? Planche's expression showed no restraint at all. He was still just a child. Then a familiar fragrance drifted through the air. Cole immediately knew who it belonged to. She had finally arrived. The true ruler of this kingdom, Celestia Bryson, the second Queen of Cuse and the current Queen. After the former Queen died of illness, Celestia took her place and used the power of her family, the Bryson family, to seize control of the core royal knights. Most of the nobles also sided with the Bryson family. As their power grew day by day, the third Prince Colin, who had no influence, became a laughingstock even to a mere commander. They decided to give Commander Fable appropriate compensation and not report such trivial matters in the future. Was it really worth paying attention to such empty words? Her open hostility toward Colin was obvious. The Queen turned her gaze to the protagonist. Celestia remarked that he seemed to have grown quite a bit recently. That was exactly the reaction he expected. The protagonist replied that he had not grown that much, but Colin would surely grow more in the future. At those words, Planche was slightly taken aback. Randall, however, said nothing and simply covered his face. It was a clear warning directed at Celestia. Whether Prince Colin had grown or not, the man almost did not recognize him. It was refreshing to finally see the prince show his face. He should have cut his hair much earlier. Viscount Renan Bryson, the second son of the Marquis of Bryson, believed the prince would continue to grow since he was still in his growth period, but the Queen stopped him from continuing that topic. Renan Bryson instead complained that he was terribly hungry and wanted the food served quickly, supposedly the owner of the Bryson shopping center, yet such a miser just as the rumors said. Strangely charming. The Queen turned her attention to her son. Kaya wondered why Planche had remained silent. She asked what he was hiding. What she truly wanted to know was about Planche's horse disobeying him. Planche said nothing and only turned away. It would have been nice to hear the explanation directly, but the Queen already knew. It was not as if Planche had completely lost control, but it was worth starting with the fact that the horse had been useless from the beginning. Planche slammed his fork onto the table and stood up, deciding to leave. It was clear that Celestia was furious that her own son had defied her. 3 weeks later, the king's birthday celebration arrived. Since it was His Majesty's event, every detail had to be perfect. People noticed a congratulatory delegation arriving from the elves, bringing gifts with them. The banquet promised to be extravagant. The princes were deeply involved in preparations. Many were eager to see them, some even excited. As the court took the prince's measurements, he realized they no longer matched the previous ones. The prince was supposed to be eating properly. Suddenly, a drop of blood fell in front of him. Only then did he notice blood dripping from the prince's nose. Ian rushed to the prince at once, clearly worried about his condition. He asked for a handkerchief immediately. Colin insisted that it was not that serious. He said he simply had not been sleeping well, and that the bleeding had already stopped. But Jan did not think that was the case at all. Taylor apologized for interrupting, but said there was another issue. His Highness had lost even more weight. 3 weeks ago, he had not been this thin. That was not good news. Callian tried to laugh it off and asked if it was really that serious. Maybe it was because of all the exercise. He had been training hard, yet his stamina kept declining. Considering the pain that still appeared whenever he tried to use mana, there was clearly something wrong with his heart. The tailor urged the prince not to treat his health lightly and asked whether he had been examined by a healer. The protagonist replied that it was nothing serious. Why would he need a healer over a simple nosebleed? That word, again. Healers. Why did his nose have to bleed in front of so many people? The tailor tried to say that it was not just blood, but Colin cut him off and repeated that he was fine. Jan suddenly said it was because the prince had picked his nose yesterday. It was an awkward thing to say. Now it seemed there was a misunderstanding, and no one present even knew that the prince had such a habit. As Ian explained, Prince Colin ate well and exercised regularly, so the nosebleed was probably due to that habit. There was no need to worry. Since Ian said so, the tailor decided to believe it. After all, he knew the prince better than anyone. Ian even winked at him. What a bastard. Still, Ian was worried. The prince did not look well at all. The worse this body became, the stronger the feeling that he might collapse. So he explained that the prince used magic and that it was a mana issue. That was how Ian ended up ruining the prince's image. But thanks to that, the situation settled down. The tailor would adjust the clothes according to the new measurements. The only problem was the limited time, but Jan believed nothing serious would happen, since the prince had other matters to attend to. There was enough time. The tailor finally felt relieved. He finished sewing the clothes for the afternoon event first. After that, Ian turned to the prince. He asked if it would happen today. At this rate, the prince's heart condition would become known throughout the palace. So before anything else, he had to meet Ellen Manisil today, no matter what. The butler announced that the joint breakfast had been cancelled due to urgent matters. Instead, each person would meet individually. There was no time to gather everyone together, so they would be seen one by one. Would it not have been better to meet together? Colin had not expected such personal meetings, which made him uneasy. He then entered the king's study. Ramandro Kokias, the king of Koyas. The protagonist greeted his majesty, but Colin soon realized the king was ignoring him. Even with Koas's poor sense of etiquette, it was clearly rude. The king told him to sit. Col congratulated him on his 38th birthday. Ramandro thanked him and asked how the prince was doing. He looked fine. At that moment, Colin understood everything. Images of servants worrying about his health flashed through his mind. They had all suggested he see a healer. Even servants with no connection to him could see how quickly Colin was fading. Now, it was clear why the king chose to meet his sons individually, despite being busy. If all the princes were present together, he would have to focus on the conversation. Meeting one by one was more efficient. Even spending time with his sons who came to congratulate him was nothing but a waste. The more Colin learned about this family, the uglier it became. A father who did not care about his sons, a first prince who was indifferent to everything, a second prince who lacked basic decorum. Even a servant had mentioned that he smelled of alcohol, only to be silenced by Planche. Later, the queen arrived, late as always. Kaya said that many things had happened. Of course, she was a queen powerful enough to make even the king look down on her. Somewhere among these people, someone was trying to kill Colin. And while the celebration was about to begin, it was now up to the protagonist to find out who it was. Who was sending the assassin after his life. People were whispering about Prince Colin's appearance in public, saying he was completely different now. He was already in the square. Compared to him, the second Prince Planche looked completely drunk. It was obvious that many people disliked seeing him show up like that. But it did not really matter. People like that always made noise over nothing. Still, something had clearly changed. Everyone present could feel it. Unlike before, something about him was different. A servant announced the arrival of the third prince, Cali Raincourse. All the guests turned to look at him, and at that moment they were certain the rumors were true. Black hair and red eyes that closely resembled Sisfenian. He had cut the bangs that once hid his face, and he even wore that red brooch, as if declaring that he no longer intended to hide anything. Ian, however, was more curious about why everyone was staring at the prince's clothes. His suspicion seemed correct. It was because the prince looked adorable in them. Satine would have loved to see this in person. People were actually staring, wondering how someone like the third prince could appear in public wearing such jewelry. Yang did not even realize how hard it had been to stop him. Ian was glad they had compromised. If Colin had worn everything they suggested, the reaction would have been far worse. Still, Ian thought the outfit suited the prince. These two were simply ignorant, and without much thought, they had chosen this brooch. The protagonist remembered Ian mentioning that his family lived in Kisis, the capital of Kais. His younger sister and father had returned to their hometown, while the rest of the family stayed in the capital. Callan asked when they would come to the royal palace. Jan replied that they would arrive if they received an invitation. He also asked when Raven should be brought to the garden. Some topics were better avoided for now. It was better to wait for the right time. In truth, Colin wanted to meet someone. Ian immediately wondered who that might be. Jan surely knew why this hall was called the Siegfried Ballroom. Of course he knew. It was named after the first patriarch and one of the 8 heroes of the bilateral war, Duke of Kitros, Hans Sif. The Sif family, the only ducal house in Kis, had remained loyal to the royal family for more than 500 years despite their great influence. Naturally, they wished to defend Sisfenian territory. This story had left a deep impression on him. Ian had already guessed what kind of person the prince wanted to meet. Colin alone chose not to answer. Then they heard laughter, Siegfried's summer night, a timeless legend. It seemed he was already here, Duke Slayman Honfrieded, a family known for its long and unwavering loyalty. This was exactly the kind of person Colin liked. Then perhaps he should test how perceptive this duke really was. As expected, the duke noticed him immediately. His gaze locked onto the prince at once, and Colin only gave a faint smile in response. Ian noticed Duke Siegfried's interest. After all, he was one of the 5 sword masters on the continent. There was no way he would overlook it. It felt pleasant. But it was still too early. For now, they would pretend nothing had happened. The king thanked everyone for their congratulations and wished them an enjoyable evening. Meanwhile, Ian and Colin slipped outside with the help of a rope. Raven behaved exactly as expected, clever and gentle. Ian warned Colin not to be deceived. The horse acted completely differently when the prince was not around. Considering how fiercely it bit, there was no point arguing about its reputation. Ian asked if they only needed to reach the main gate. Colin replied that they would wait there. That was when they overheard someone arguing that he was not allowed to enter without an invitation. He had traveled a long distance to attend the celebration. Even so, the guards told him to leave, saying he could not enter. This man was here. Ellen Manasil asked again whether they were truly certain about refusing him entry, just because he lacked an invitation. He even introduced himself. Even so, without an invitation, entry was still not allowed. It was a truly lousy situation. Cuse really judged people by their appearance. Even Colin found it strange to separate people based on what they wore. It almost felt like Ellen Manasil was deliberately being picky, as if he was searching for a reason not to enter Cuse at all. If that was the case, then he should just leave. Just as Callian tried to follow him, Ian stopped him. By the king's order, no one was allowed to leave during the celebration. But at this rate, they would lose the magician. Callan told Ian to do everything possible to stop the soldiers, and then he chased after Ellen Manasil. The guards shouted for the prince to stop. Leaving the gates was forbidden by royal order, but Raven leapt straight over them. The guards began yelling that the prince had ridden outside the palace. They rushed to prepare their horses to give chase. Ian had no idea what to do. If this continued, they would surely pursue the prince. Then he remembered Colin's words, "Do everything you can to stop them." He had to focus. He was Prince Callian's servant now, and protecting the prince was his duty. Ian shouted at the guards to stop. He claimed that Duke Sigfrided had given permission for the prince to leave. The guards demanded to know who he was to use the duke's name so lightly. Ian answered that he was Shoyan Sigfrided, the eldest son of Duke Sigfrided. Not long after, Ian burned with embarrassment as he listened to the laughter of the person in front of him. He protested that it was no reason to laugh like that. Standing beside him was his father. Duke Slammin apologized, saying he simply could not believe his son had come up with such a thing. His son who had left the family was still just a child. The Duke believed it had been a good decision. Ian did not agree. This would surely affect their relationship with His Majesty. Simon said that the king would not ask about it. Ian was unsure what his father meant. The Duke repeated that the king would not ask. Ramandro thought too much. If the child received help from the Siegfried family, the king would be forced to question their intentions. And if no punishment followed, it would mean acknowledging a friendly relationship between their family and the prince, something the Brizan family would see as a problem. Regardless of the reason, it was not as if anyone would criticize Ellen for not having an invitation. The man wondered why the third prince of Cuse was chasing after him. Colin had heard that upon reaching the 7th circle, one's age would regress. It seemed that rumor was true. The man remarked that it was already late and wondered if the prince would return. He tried to open a closed door. The threshold was still too high. Was this old man speaking in metaphors? That was fine. This game could be played by 2 people. Colin asked why Ellen was trying to force open a closed door when there was an open one nearby. What he really meant was asking where Ellen had left the invitation that had been kindly prepared for him. He had been so busy fighting the wind that he forgot to wipe his feet at the threshold. Colin had not expected the guards to make such a mistake. Instead of apologizing, this kid criticized him. Was that honesty or just shamelessness? That was the question. What an interesting prince. At first glance, Colin looked like an ordinary 14-year-old boy. Then Ellen noticed something. He looked at the prince's wrist, suddenly grabbed his hand and apologized for his rudeness. Colin did not even understand what was happening. At that moment, pain stabbed through his heart.